It's been an interesting week. We have, as you said, spent a lot of time working with our tenants, getting a feel of the market, sensing how they are doing. And it differs across assets, as we talked. On the residential side, our multifamily buildings, I would say most people are paying. We collected over 90% of the rents this past couple weeks, which was a good sign. And we've reached out to all of our residents to find out, why are they paying? Why are they not paying? And just to make sure that if someone did lose their job, that we could work with them and we could help them. And we have been doing that. On the commercial office buildings, we've collected essentially all of our rent. We haven't had any pushback yet. And, our hope is that that trend continues. The soft spot, as you know, has been the retail sector. And, whether it's, our Hudson Yards or Time Warner Center or the malls throughout the country, all of those assets have really suffered, and our tenants are suffering. I think a lot of them are waiting for the government relief programs to kick in, and hopefully that will help. But we collected across our portfolio about 35% of the rent. I heard the mall portfolios are down to roughly 20%. So it really depends on who your tenants are, how strong they are, their capability to pay, and most importantly, how long this goes on. And we've been spending a lot of time, obviously.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. What are you planning on in terms of that timeline, and what kind of steps and things are you thinking about in terms of as retail reopens and as some of these office buildings reopen, what kind of changes that you may have to make?
So we are actually, we have set up a committee internally to really talk about what the reopening looks like and how we're going to treat our customers when they enter into our offices and our retail. I think the governor and maybe the president are going to determine when we first are able to go back. And my guess is we go back to our offices first, and we go back. Maybe it's the reverse of the way the governor shut it down. So if you remember, first it was 50%, and then 25% of the people were allowed in. So maybe 25% go back, and then 50% go back. There's going to be a lot of new protocols. So when you come into an office building, there's likely temperature testing. Everyone will be in masks. There's going to be extra cleaning in all the buildings. Do you touch the elevator buttons? It's not clear that that's something anyone wants to do right now. What's the capacity in the elevators? One of the things that I think could be most helpful is staggered shifts so that so many people aren't going through the lobbies at the same time. So I do think there's going to be fundamental changes in the workplace. And then I think ultimately,
and in terms of,
I think retail is going to be a second step. I think retail is going to be much slower to come back. Just because people go to their offices, I don't think they're going to rush out to congregate in restaurants. Nor do I even think that'll be allowed in the first wave of openings.
And in terms of timeline for the retail piece of this, what are you thinking about?
We're going to look to open as fast as we can after the offices, because once people are back in their offices, they will look to be able to get back to retail and get back to restaurants. But I think it's going to be weeks past the office opening.
But if offices open in June, you think July is realistic, or you think even sooner?
We certainly will open. How busy it becomes and what the acceptability is, of customers to be walking through and congregating, only time will tell.
And you talked about temperature testing on the way into the building. Is that something that real estate companies and owners like yours will be doing? Is that something that your tenants are going to be doing? Who's going to take responsibility for that? And by the way, what do you think the legal liability becomes for doing that?
Right. So we actually just ordered 5 of these scanning machines to test them out. We're going to use them both. First, we're going to test them out on our construction sites and see that they work and they're functional. And we're going to see if we can actually get them to work in a commercial office setting so that people can walk through and it becomes less invasive than someone walking up to you and putting a thermometer on your head. So these are all questions that we're going to have to figure out as we re-enter the workplace.
And are you talking to other people in the industry? Is this something that you think Related is going to be doing, and others? You think all landlords are going to be doing this, or do you think it's going to be very selective in terms of how aggressive the approach is on the way in and out?
I think that people are going to be very cautious about going back to work, and the more that we as an industry can do to make our residents or our office workers comfortable that we are doing the right thing, that we are looking to keep the facilities as clean as possible and keeping our employees and workers as safe as possible, it will be a smoother return to work. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, and I know others in the industry are looking to do the same.
One of the things we talked about last week, which was fascinating, was well-capitalized companies that were sending letters out to landlords saying that they weren't going to pay. By the way, there was a letter that is reported in the past 24 hours that Tesla was sending out letters to its landlords saying that it wasn't going to pay. Have you had more of that?
We have. I think it's become standard that lots of companies are sending those letters. And look, I told you last week, I think it's very important that companies, large companies that have strong balance sheets and have lots of liquidity continue to pay. And mainly because this is a system, right? The money that goes to rent, they go to landlords. Landlords that have to pay their employees, insurance, real estate taxes, very important for the cities, and interest and debt service. And ultimately, if that cycle breaks, right, you're going to have more defaults at the banks, and then the banks are going to have a problem, and they're going to have to get bailed out. And it really is that system. And so rent is just one part of this ecosystem. And I think companies with strong balance sheets need to do their part and play a role here in this recovery. Right. Otherwise, we'll wind up with a further problem down the road. The most effective thing that could happen is that the government money enter the system, right? And so if a company gets that money, they will have the liquidity to pay their employees and right. to pay the rent.
How worried are you, by the way, about that system backing up? We had J.P. Morgan reporting its earnings today, talking about taking a big reserve. J.P. Morgan obviously has a pretty big balance sheet. Some other banks may not, and also may be exposed to some of the bigger risks. When you look at sort of the national portfolio of real estate potentially backing up, what does that look like to you? Should we be worried?
Look, this again all depends on how long this goes on. If this is 30 more days or 60 more days, the industry will survive. The banks will survive. If this is 4 months or 6 months, it's really going to take its toll. Fortunately, the government gave strong guidance to the banking system through regulatory relief that they should work with their borrowers. And for the most part, I would say almost all banks are entering into forbearance agreements now with their lenders. And if that's true in a particular case, landlords are able to work with their tenants to do similar deferral programs for their rent. But where it's going to be a problem, I think, is more in the CMBS side, where it's very difficult. There's no one to talk to in terms of entering into these forbearance agreements. And so there's going to be backup in the system. The biggest issue is how fast can we get back to work?
I got to ask you, and maybe it's part of this moral, I don't know if it's a moral question about companies that have capital behind them to pay their rents. A couple of people tweeted out after you were on the broadcast last week. What about Equinox? Apparently Equinox reportedly sent letters to its landlords saying that it wasn't going to pay. You're on the board of Equinox, and it's, I believe, part of the Related company, or Related has a big investment in it. What is the moral obligation to pay, if you can?
Look, sure. I mean, Equinox is an independent company with multiple investors. We don't make strategic or operational decisions for them. But generally, every business needs to really evaluate their liquidity positions. That's what Equinox is doing. And they're going to have to make judgments on what they need to do to protect their operations, most importantly their employees, and ultimately how they get back to work. And that's what's happening over there.
And so, but I guess but that's the question. So a gym, for example, obviously is going to be impacted, but at the same time, I believe it's actually a very well capitalized company. No.
Equinox is dealing with the same situation that many other companies are dealing with, right? So they have to fundamentally look at their liquidity position. They made a decision to keep their employees, paying their employees, and that's a decision that every company needs to make. And
right.
I think it's a balance. Really the issue that I'm talking about are kind of these large public companies with lots of liquidity, and someone even like a Tesla. I mean, when you take a company like a Tesla, they should pay their rent.